2025, humanitarian aid distribution in Gaza took a deeply controversial turn. A U.S.-based motorcycle gang with a known history of hostility toward Islam was involved in providing security at aid sites. This gang, known as the Infidels Motorcycle Club, has members with anti-Muslim tattoos, and they were hired as armed contractors at distribution locations. The consequences were tragic. Over 1,000 civilians died while trying to access aid. This is not fiction. That year, after Israel imposed a full blockade on Gaza, cutting off humanitarian aid for more than 2 months, a new organization emerged to fill the void, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation (GHF). Supported by both the U.S. and Israeli governments, GHF began operating food distribution centers across southern Gaza, but controversy quickly erupted over the choice of security personnel. A BBC investigation revealed that at least 10 members of the Infidels Motorcycle Club were employed by UG Solutions, a private military contractor responsible for GHF's site security. 7 of these individuals held senior leadership roles in the operations. This motorcycle club is not a typical veterans group. Founded in 2006 by U.S.-Iraq war veterans, the Infidels MC identifies with the Crusaders, adopting symbols and language reflecting a militant, anti-Islamic worldview. Their imagery includes references to the First Crusade of 1095, and the group has shared anti-Muslim content online. In 2015, they organized a pig roast in Colorado Springs as a deliberate provocation during Ramadan. The group's mission statement makes it clear. They oppose what they call radical jihadism and support efforts against Islamic extremism. But critics argue their activities go far beyond targeting extremism, promoting a broader anti-Muslim ideology. At the center of this scandal is Johnny Taz Mulford, a member of the Infidels MC Florida chapter. Mulford is a military veteran who served in both the U.S. Marine Corps and Army, with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He led UG Solutions team in Gaza. However, his past is controversial. Military records show he was debarred in 2005 for involvement in a bribery and fraud scheme, although this was lifted just before his retirement in 2007. Mulford's tattoos reflect his beliefs: American flags and flames interlaced with Crusader symbols, including the year 1095 tattooed across his chest. Just weeks before deploying to Gaza, he used Facebook to recruit other combat veterans, emphasizing the need for physical readiness and willingness to deploy on 12 hours' notice. The recruitment effort was successful. A former contractor estimated that about 40 of the 320 UG Solutions personnel working in Gaza were affiliated with the Infidels MC. The pay was substantial: $980 per day, rising to $1,580 for team leaders. The full extent of the gang's involvement was accidentally revealed when Mulford mistakenly used "reply all" in an email to journalists, exposing the identities of 10 other gang members working in Gaza. Among them were top leadership figures of the Infidels MC. For example, Larry Rod Jarrett, the gang's vice president, was in charge of logistics for UG Solutions in Gaza, while National Treasurer Bill St. Sib led security at one of GHF's 4 sites. Another founding member, Richard Tracker Lofton, served as a team leader. These individuals weren't just hired hands, they were leading operations. Their presence raised urgent questions. How did they pass background checks? Why was a group with open anti-Islamic views allowed to run security for humanitarian aid? The situation exposed a major flaw in oversight of private military contractors. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation itself symbolized a larger issue: the privatization of humanitarian aid. GHF was established in February 2025 with the goal of distributing food during Gaza's growing famine. It operated independently of the United Nations and instead relied on U.S. and Israeli-backed private firms. Two main contractors were hired: UG Solutions, based in North Carolina, and run by a former U.S. Special Forces soldier, and Safe Reach Solutions, led by Philip F. Riley, a former CIA paramilitary chief and Afghanistan station chief. Riley previously worked at Constellus, the parent company of the controversial security firm formerly known as Blackwater. The on-the-ground reality at the GHF distribution sites was grim. Each of the 4 open-air facilities was surrounded by berms, guard towers, and military infrastructure. Civilians accessed the sites through narrow, controlled entry points. From the very start, violence erupted. On May 27, 2025, when GHF operations began, reports of killings began to emerge. Since that date, more than 2,600 Palestinian civilians seeking aid have reportedly been killed, many by Israeli forces, contractors, and unidentified armed groups. The UN Human Rights Office confirmed that by mid-July, 875 people had died while trying to reach food aid, 674 of them near GHF distribution sites. By the end of July, that number exceeded 1,000, with most deaths caused by Israeli forces. One of the worst incidents occurred on June 17th, when Israeli troops reportedly killed 59 people and injured over 200 others at a distribution site. Eyewitnesses said tanks, drones, and soldiers opened fire on civilians, and at least 2 Israeli shells landed directly in the crowd. This event was labeled a massacre and became the deadliest incident at a humanitarian site to date. Testimonies from former contractors described reckless, dangerous practices by GHF security teams. 2 American contractors spoke anonymously to the Associated Press, saying they came forward because they were alarmed by what they saw on the ground. This crisis has highlighted the dangerous consequences of outsourcing humanitarian aid to private military contractors with ideological agendas, and has drawn international condemnation. It also underscores the need for stricter oversight, accountability, and ethical standards when conducting humanitarian operations in conflict zones. Witnesses reported that security personnel hired to protect aid distribution sites in Gaza were often unqualified, inadequately vetted, heavily armed, and appeared to operate with no accountability. Conditions at these sites were described by officials as death traps. UNRWA Commissioner General Filippo Lazzarini condemned the system, calling it an abomination that humiliates and degrades desperate people, and a system costing more lives than it saves. The humanitarian crisis extended far beyond the immediate violence. According to Gaza's health ministry, 80 children had died from starvation since the beginning of the war, and 21 adults died of starvation in just the days leading up to the report. A United Nations spokesperson confirmed that infants were dying from severe acute malnutrition. Despite this, 6,000 aid trucks carrying food, medicine, and supplies remained stuck in Egypt and Jordan, just a 3-hour drive from Gaza. The international response was swift and unified. UN experts expressed deep concern, warning that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF, was a deeply troubling example of humanitarian aid being exploited for covert military and geopolitical purposes in violation of international law. On July 1, 2025, 171 non-governmental organizations, including Save the Children, Oxfam, Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, and the Norwegian Refugee Council, issued a joint declaration demanding that the GHF aid distribution system be dismantled. They cited grave concerns that it was endangering civilians and contributing to further loss of life. Human Rights Watch released a legal assessment stating that Israeli forces at GHF sites had regularly opened fire on starving Palestinian civilians, acts which constituted serious violations of international law and potential war crimes. Outrage spread to U.S. lawmakers. Senator Pete Welch and Representative Sean Casten condemned the employment of Infidels Motorcycle Club members by the GHF's security contractor. Representative Casten described the group as an Islamophobic hate organization and called for the United States to immediately suspend all funding to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Muslim civil rights organizations also issued strong denunciations. Edward Ahmed Mitchell, Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIRT, stated, putting the Infidels Motorcycle Club in charge of delivering humanitarian aid in Gaza is like putting the Ku Klux Klan in charge of delivering aid in Sudan. It makes no sense whatsoever, Mitchell further explained. When modern anti-Muslim extremists celebrate 1095 and the Crusades, they are glorifying the mass killing of Muslims and the expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Jerusalem. Former contractors echoed these concerns. Anthony Aguilar, a former Green Beret and UG Solutions employee who became a whistleblower, questioned the symbolism. If I went into Israel with a Nazi swastika on my arm and said, "Heil Hitler," what would people think of me? The companies involved attempted to defend their hiring practices. UG Solutions claimed that it conducts comprehensive background checks and only deploys individuals who are fully vetted. It stated that it does not disqualify employees based on personal affiliations or hobbies unless they affect job performance. The company described Johnny Mulford, one of the central figures in the controversy, as a trusted and experienced professional with more than 3 decades of military support experience, asserting, "We stand by his reputation, record, and contributions to successful missions." The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation released a separate statement affirming its zero-tolerance policy for any form of discrimination or hateful conduct. It later clarified that Mulford had not been involved with the organization since August, and that additional allegations were under review. However, the scandal has brought to light broader systemic issues around the privatization of humanitarian aid in conflict zones. According to a New York Times investigation, the concept of an Israeli-backed, privately managed food distribution system was first discussed in December 2023. Throughout 2024, Israeli officials worked closely with U.S. private security firms to develop and implement the plan. The resulting toll has been catastrophic. Over the past 23 months of conflict, nearly 3,000 civilians in Gaza have been killed while attempting to access humanitarian aid, and nearly 20,000 others have been injured. According to the new Humanitarians database, there have been nearly 200 attacks on aid distribution efforts, with a sharp increase after the GHF began operations on May 27th. Legal experts weighed in with serious concerns. Adil Hake, a professor of international law at Rutgers University, remarked, "These are not isolated incidents. They form a pattern, one that reflects state policy and an acceptance that this violence will continue indefinitely." The controversy also exposed how the involved companies responded to mounting criticism. UG Solutions hired the crisis management firm 7letter, whose leadership includes former spokespersons from the Biden and Obama administrations. This raised further concerns about the connections between private military contractors and political power structures, and the resulting lack of accountability. The hiring of Infidels Motorcycle Club members for operations in Gaza was more than a questionable staffing decision. It became symbolic of the dangerous merging of ideological extremism, military contracting, and humanitarian operations in a war zone. entrusting the delivery of aid to individuals openly hostile to Islam, adorned with crusader symbols, and operating in a region of desperate Muslim civilians, created conditions that international experts said were fundamentally incompatible with humanitarian principles. The numbers speak for themselves. Over 1,000 civilians were killed while attempting to obtain food. Thousands more were wounded. Children died of starvation while aid trucks waited just miles away. In the words of United Nations officials, the aid distribution system became a death trap. This crisis raises urgent questions about the future of humanitarian aid. When governments bypass international institutions like the UN in favor of private contractors, when those contractors fail to screen for ideological biases, and when financial and political interests are allowed to influence humanitarian work, the results can be deadly. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation scandal is a stark warning. Humanitarian aid must be impartial, neutral, and independent. Mixing military goals, private profits, and extremist ideologies into aid operations violates every standard that makes such efforts safe and effective. The true victims were those most in need, vulnerable civilians simply trying to feed their families, caught between armed forces, private contractors, and the machinery of conflict. As investigations continue and war crimes inquiries move forward, one lesson remains clear. Privatizing aid in war zones, especially when those in charge harbor animosity toward the people they serve, is a formula for disaster. The GHF operation did not represent innovation in humanitarian delivery. It demonstrated the devastating consequences of abandoning humanitarian values in favor of political and military agendas.